All right. Can you guys hear me? All right. All right. That's great. So, hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I don't think there's a free seat in the house, so thank you all for being here. My name is Ahmed. I'm the founder and president of this platform. It's supported by the Raif Dinçkök Student Forum Fund and the Mehrotra Institute. So over the past 2 years, we've grown into one of the largest student speaker series in Boston. We've hosted an incredible group of founders, investors, and entrepreneurs. But I truly can't think of anyone better to wrap off this semester and year than Ahmed. Will is the CEO and founder of Whoop. Since founding the company in 2012, he has scaled into one of the most valuable standalone wearable platforms in the world. It's trusted by elite athletes including LeBron James, Patrick Mahomes, and Cristiano Ronaldo. Whoop has raised over $900 million from some leading investors, including QIA, Mubadala, and SoftBank, and was most recently valued at $10.1 billion. Will is also on the board of fellows at the Harvard Medical School. Will, thank you so much for being here. Please join me in welcoming Will Ahmed. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's been an incredible journey for Whoop. We were very lucky to have your Chief Product Officer, Ed Baker, here a year and a half ago. There's a picture of Ed. And, you know,
no, I said love it. Great to be here. Thank you all very much for having me.
And we were joking after. We said that, oh, like, you know, we're right down the street and you can come back anytime. And here we are. So thank you for taking with us.
Yeah, we're neighbors. So we have a great affection for BU, and I hope to do a lot more with you.
Well, everybody sees you as the CEO of this $8 billion company. Take us back. What were you like when you were younger? What was the young Will like?
Well, I'll say this, and can you all hear me okay? Yeah? I'll say this, I mean, it really wasn't that long ago that I was like sitting where you are today, so to speak. I vividly remember being 20 years old, 21 years old, 22 years old, and just trying to figure out, you know, what was this next chapter in my life going to be. And I was someone who I think grew up always interested in technology personally, but it wasn't like obvious to me that technology was a career path, let alone starting a business. And I was also, I think, surrounded by a lot of people that were going into consulting and finance. And, you know, I see some people nodding their heads, so maybe you all are familiar with that too. But there was a sort of peer pressure, at least I felt when I was 20 years old, to follow a certain path that seemed like maybe the next path of competition, so to speak, or a process, so to speak, to get recruited into X, Y, or Z. And it took, I think, for me at least, some courage to try to break out of that mold and to try to find kind of my own inner voice, if you will, for what I wanted to do next in my life. And I was someone who was, at the time, playing squash in college, and I always loved sports and exercise. I was training a lot on the Harvard squash team, and I was someone who used to overtrain. So you kind of go through a period of getting, you know, fitter and fitter, and then, you know, somewhat surprisingly, you find yourself sort of falling off a cliff, and you don't necessarily know why. And at the time, I got interested in, well, how come I'm facing this problem? And I do think for any of you that are entrepreneurial in the room, try to identify a problem in your life that you want to solve can be a great road to entrepreneurship. And I didn't realize that I was starting a company. The only thing I knew was that I had this thing that was bothering me, which was that I didn't really know what I was doing to my body while I was training, and I love training. And so I wanted to be able to measure that. And I started looking at what are the products out there that can measure it. I started doing some research in physiology. And that was the path to becoming an entrepreneur, which we can talk more about.
And you were an all-round athlete in high school, and you ultimately chose squash, which you went on to be captain of the Harvard squash team. You very strategically positioned the PU club squash team over there.
All right.
And they beat Harvard at nationals.
Oh, wow. That was a good setup. Well, congratulations to you.
So why squash? Why out of all these sports?
Well, my father is Egyptian, and he actually immigrated to this country when he was 22 years old. And it was like, you know, 3 $3,000 in a suitcase, figure out how to make it in America. But he was a great squash player. He was a professional squash player, and so I learned how to play squash, in part from my father, and in part, I grew up on the North Shore of Long Island, and so I learned how to play squash there along with a dozen other sports. And I think that one I just turned out to maybe be the best at amongst a variety of other sports.
And what were those very early days at Dinçkök like? We have an ancient relic, is that the right word?
Yeah.
Just one back. One back. You posted this on your Instagram. There was a picture of all the caffeine products. With your root paper.
Oh, okay, yeah.
What were those early days like?
Well, so that was the final night that I finished writing a Whoop business plan. So this was spring of 2012. It was my senior year, and in the fall of my senior year, I decided I was not going to take a job in finance or consulting like a lot of my peers, and I was going to start this company. And that was, I would say, one of the hardest decisions to make because it really felt like taking a leap. Like, I don't really know what I'm about to do, but I know that, in all my free time, this is the thing that I'm thinking about. And again, I think that's a good test for you all as you think about what you want to do next in your life, or at least where you want to start your career. Where does your mind go when it's empty, so to speak, or when you're not staring at your phone or you're not in class? Like, where do you drift to? What do you think about in the shower before you fall asleep or whatever? I mean, for me, for the last 14, 15, 16 years, it's been the idea for this company, and that was certainly true when I was 22 years old. And so my senior year, I committed to doing this thing, and I spent the whole year really trying to research what it meant to start a business. And at least in the case of trying to build Whoop, that was two things. One, it was, well, what do you actually need to be able to measure about the human body to create a product that could deeply understand training, and athletics, and health, sleep, recovery? These were themes back then as well. And then the second piece is, well, if you could actually build that technology, how could you make a business from it? And just to say, I was incredibly naive and inexperienced about both of those things. I started this company that's really at the intersection of hardware and software and design and medicine. And I wasn't an engineer, I wasn't a computer scientist, I wasn't a designer, and I certainly wasn't a doctor. And so the only thing that I had going for me when I was 22 years old was that I had a very clear vision, at least of what I thought needed to exist in the world. I was obsessed with this problem that I wanted to solve, and I was willing to work my ass off to do it. And that meant just meeting with lots and lots of people. And so from that point forward, where I had that business plan, I would just go out and meet people and show them the business plan and show them the research paper and say, this is the thing that I'm doing, this is the future that I believe in, do you want to be a part of it?
And this research paper was your senior thesis, I believe. There are a lot of graduating seniors here who, may wonder, will whatever they're writing about, will that really be valuable in the future? And your original three metrics were recovery, intensity, and sleep, which are still the three core pillars of Whoop. What made you stay on such a straight line, such a straight path? You have so many startups that decide to pivot 3, 4, 5 times before they find product market fit. So what is that conviction?
Well, the paper was called the feedback tool, measuring intensity, recovery, and sleep, which, to your point, has aged pretty well because the three kind of core pillars on Whoop today still remain sleep, recovery, and we've rebranded intensity to strain, but essentially it was the same concept. And so I do think when you're starting something, there's a question of how much endures, how much do you believe, how much in the face of market feedback do you have to iterate and change, and you want to try to have these two feelings or these two sort of contrarian things held in your mind. And one is that the idea that you have is absolutely right no matter what, and the other is that you're going to hear lots of things that make it seem like that idea is completely wrong. And you want to be able to kind of oscillate between those two things. And that, just to say that, is pretty uncomfortable. And for me, especially when I was 22, 23 years old, and I was starting this thing, and I was kind of insecure about starting the thing because I didn't really know how to start it, and I didn't really know what I was doing. you face an enormous amount of rejection. I did especially, and I would argue in the first year of starting Move, I faced more rejection than I had in my entire life up to that point. And so there is also an element of if you really want to be an entrepreneur, you're going to find out quickly whether you actually want to be an entrepreneur. Because you wake up every morning and someone's going to kind of punch you in the face. Not literally, but that's going to kind of how you feel. And so there's a lot of lonely moments, I think, in building a company. And certainly, you pitch someone on recovery, and they tell you, well, I don't know anything about recovery. I don't think people care about recovery. In fact, there's all sorts of momentum right now for steps. Why don't you do steps? Well, no, recovery is this really important tool, and that's going to be the thing that tells you how hard you should train, and no one can measure recovery, and if we can measure heart rate variability, then I think we can measure recovery, and we can give people a score every day, and this is what I believe, and no, of course, that's not going to work. You have to understand recovery is a very small thing. It's only appealing to athletes. And by the way, athletes don't even care that much about recovery. So anyway, you understand the dialogue, so to speak, that I'm alluding to, where you have this strong point of view, but then time and time again, when you pitch people, you get rejected, and you have to deal with that. And so there is a test, I think, for every entrepreneur of how much pain are you willing to endure in that process. And so your pain threshold will hopefully grow with every rejection. And one thing I try to do is reframe a lot of these things in my mind. So, if you think of rejection as sort of like lifting weights and you're getting stronger in this path to pain tolerance, well, maybe getting rejected is a good thing because in turn you get stronger. So there's all these sort of slight nuances in the way to think about even all the rejection that you get and all the push and the pull. But back to your original question, you can also look for signs, and I think that there is a good thing in entrepreneurship, which is around this idea of how quickly can you get something into people's hands that starts to give you a feeling of are you on the right track. Now, in the case of building Whoop, just to state the obvious, there was a hardware component that we had to build from scratch. There was a software component that we had to build from scratch. There was a whole design element because it was going to be worn on your body that had all kinds of issues in terms of its comfort and its wearability and what it said about you. But back to this question of intensity, recovery, and sleep, was there a way to start getting at that? And so we actually bought other products that we thought could simulate the scores. And we got people actually to wear chest straps first thing when they woke up in the morning. Now, the chest strap is this kind of cumbersome, uncomfortable heart rate monitor. But we got people to actually, first thing in the morning, they would wake up and they would put this chest strap on. And by the way, in order to get a proper signal on it, you had to get it wet. And so for a lot of people, maybe they didn't have water by their beds, so they're spitting on the chest strap. It's kind of gross and it's uncomfortable to wear. But lo and behold, they would put this chest strap on and it would measure their resting heart rate. It would measure this thing called heart rate variability, which is this like lens in your autonomic nervous system. And Whoop, the app that we built at the time, which was a pretty ugly app, it would generate a recovery score. And lo and behold, we had maybe 5, 8, eventually 12, 15 teams doing this whole routine of putting chest straps on in the morning. And remarkably, people were doing it. And they were doing it because they liked getting this score every day, this red, yellow, green score that kind of gave them a sense of the status of their body. And so there was so much wrong with that, right? But in the back of my mind, I was like, oh, this is working. This is working because when we can actually create the product that does it all seamlessly, and you just wear it, and it'll tell you much more accurately, there's not going to be the spinning, there's not going to be the chest straps, I think people are going to like it. So, again, you have to have some strong point of view, I think, of what the world looks like when you're successful. But there are steps along the way to tell you, to gut check, or is this actually going in the right direction?
And you raised $575 million at a $10.1 billion valuation last week, so congratulations. And you mentioned going public is somewhere on the horizon. Now that you've done this big round, what are customers looking for next?
I'll just say one thing about raising capital, because if I had heard that figure when I was in your shoes, it would seem like so impossible, just to state the obvious. Like, When I was 22, I was trying to raise like $500,000. Now, okay, we just raised over 500 million. But I'm telling you, raising that $500,000 was just as hard as the 500 million we just raised. And there's a bunch of different reasons for that. One is obviously the stage of the company. But one big reason for it is that I had no idea how to raise capital. And I hadn't done it before, and it was really hard. And I think for anyone who is going to raise capital for the first time, it's a skill that you need to learn. Do not think that because you go pitch 10 investors and they all say no, that you're bad at raising capital. You are just learning how to raise capital. I mean, how many things in your life have you done well up to 10 times? Right? Probably not that many, but I meet entrepreneurs all the time that get incredibly low on themselves because they've been rejected by a few investors. And now, mind you, those investors, just to state it, at the seed stage, which is probably going to apply to some of the founders in this room, those investors in a given year will probably see about 1,000 companies. And of those 1,000 companies, they're going to end up investing in 10. And of those 10, somewhere between 5 and 7 are going to fail. Right? So really, their batting average is not great. Okay? Like they're not oracles. Okay? Do not think that the investor sitting across from you necessarily knows more about your business than you do. And that's a hard thing to internalize because that person's credentialed and they've raised all this money and they've invested in, Uber or fill in the blank great company. But do not think because an investor rejects you that you can't be successful. And that's something that I wish I had heard more of when I was in your shoes because I definitely got down on myself from investor rejection. And the more successful that you're going to be and the more your company is going to grow or the thing that you're going to build is going to take off, the more investors that are going to reject you. Okay? And so there is an element almost of the more rejection that you face, maybe the further that you've actually gone. So I'll just say all of that as a background to raising capital. In terms of what I think our members are looking for, I think it's for us to continue innovating. Just show of hands, how many people in here are wearing a Whoop? Okay, so, maybe a third of the room, we can probably do a little better than that, so the third of you that are wearing it, right, you've got, hopefully at this point, a great baseline of your sleep, and your recovery, your health metrics, and we want to keep pushing that further and further. And what we ultimately want for Whoop is that it's a product that's either going to make you healthier or one day it's going to save your life. Like those to me feel like the two big frontiers for health monitoring. That's the potential of continuous health monitoring. It is your daily coach, it's your daily health companion, it's your daily doctor. It's going to tell you what's going on. It's going to make you healthier, nudge, nudge, nudge. And then one day you're going to get an alert. Hopefully you don't get the alert because it doesn't need to be there. But one day if that alert is needed, it says, lo and behold, you need to get to the hospital in the next 30 minutes because something bad's about to happen. And to me, that feels like the potential of continuous health monitoring. So that is what the Whoop team is building right up the street. And we've got 800 brilliant people working on it. And we're hiring another 600 people this year to go all in on it.
And you have a few hundred here.
Yeah, exactly.
So speaking of hiring, Amazon, cut 16,000 workers in a single morning. You have Block that fired 4,000 people, Oracle 30,000 people. What's your contrarian thesis? Why hire so many people? In this AI age, especially, when there's this big question of whether entry-level workers are especially needed.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to be critical of is the CEOs right now that are saying that they're doing all these mass layoffs because of AI. Okay? If you're an enormous company, your AI adoption has been slow because you have all sorts of challenges to actually get stuff implemented. So the idea that AI is like running through these companies and pervasively replacing employees is just simply not true. Okay? And what is going on behind the scenes is you have companies that are underperforming, or they overhired during COVID, or they actually have crazy policies which were like work wherever, whenever, and now they're realizing they need to And so AI all of a sudden has become this sort of air cover for them to clean a lot of things up. And all of a sudden they think they sound smart on an analyst call, being like, well, we're using AI to drive efficiency and improve our overall workplace productivity, and as a consequence, we're cutting 16,000 people. They probably would have done the 16,000 people without AI at all. Okay, so I am skeptical that AI and mass layoffs are really tied together at this stage. The second thing is, I don't know about you all, but using these tools feels like a massive equalizer, right? Like, let's take chess as an analogy. I grew up playing chess. I love chess. Okay, over the course of my lifetime, AI in chess has gone from, being maybe a bad assistant to now being better than any human being. So if you gave a grandmaster and you gave someone in this room who had never played chess before a world-class AI at chess, all of a sudden those games feel pretty even though you had a chess master and you had someone who maybe never played before, because of AI. So to me, that makes the person who's the entry-level person actually maybe more valuable, not less valuable, right? And that's all of you in this room, right? So the extent to which you all can use these tools to take on someone who spent 10, 20, 30 years in their career, that's pretty badass. That makes you very valuable, right? And so an advantage that you all have right now over everyone who's working right now in corporate America or even in startups is that you have the time to figure out how to use these tools effectively. And you absolutely should figure out how to use these tools effectively. And you should be bold about the fact that you know how to use these tools effectively. Because that is going to differentiate you enormously in the job market. Now, at Whoop, we've got a few things that we feel pretty excited about. One is that our business grew over 100% year over year last year. So we are adding members around the world. We are growing fast. Two is that we think our market opportunity is much bigger than the market that we've penetrated. So when your market is growing and your market feels vast, do you want to get small or do you want to get big, right? Do you want to chase the opportunity or do you want to chase efficiency? So we're chasing the opportunity. We believe it's a race right now to build the best health monitoring technology in the world, and that's what we want to do. And so then, back to the point with AI, I think AI is a great enabler of talent. And so do I want more talent or less talent in an environment where we've got tailwinds, right? We've got these tools that are going to make us better. So all of that leads to us saying we're going to hire more people in a given year than we ever have in the company's history.
And you founded the Mass AI Coalition. You brought in companies like HubSpot, Wayfair, Flavio. You already have so much on your plate. Why start that?
Well, we do believe at Whoop that a few very motivated people together can punch way above their weight. And so this was an example where we had a few members of our team get very excited about it. And it also was, again, a problem that we all felt we were facing, which was that Massachusetts had lost its, I think, reputation around AI and around technology more broadly. And here we are on, the eve, so to speak, of this AI revolution, and really what I believe will be a technology revolution. And our home state, where Whoop is based, isn't really getting the respect that it deserves. And mind you, we have great students here at BU and at MIT and Eastern and Harvard and so on and so forth that are building a lot of these companies from dorm rooms. And yet they're moving to Silicon Valley because everyone tells them, well, that's where you're supposed to be. Well, I don't know. I started a pretty good company up the street, So, yeah, so it feels like it just felt like there was a mismatch between the capabilities of the state and certainly the city of Boston and the perception of it. And so the simple question we asked is, well, what can we do about it? Well, let's try to get together, some of the other CEOs and founders in the city and in the state and just talk about it. And so that started with 16 people. And then, we did another event, and all of a sudden we had 250 people, and then we had investors who wanted to be a part of it, and, the mayor of Boston showed up, and the governor of Massachusetts showed up, and all of a sudden we had, some energy behind it. And so for all of you in this room who are interested in it, It's the Massachusetts AI Coalition, and we're very excited to be supporting, in particular, all of you in this room who want to build things here. So if you've got a great idea, and you've got 3 classmates who want to do it with you, or you're a solo entrepreneur, you're trying to figure it out, we want you to stay in Boston. We want to give you office space. We want to help you get funded, and the sky's the limit.
And we're all benefactors of that, right? So early on, you went very straight with getting big names, Patrick Mahomes, Michael Phelps, LeBron James, Cristiano Ronaldo. How did you land those first big names? You must have had a very innovative approach to that.
So in 2014 and 15, we had built maybe 100 move straps, and we were quite proud of them. And we carried them around in silver cases, and they were quite precious. And some of them would break, and this, that, and the other, but they were very important to us. And at this point, too, we believe that we now had a product that, for the very best athletes, would give them information they never got before. And so we said, well, who are the very best athletes we could get? And it was that simple. We started writing, names down of the best athletes in the world. And it wasn't that much more complicated than Googling, who are the best athletes in the world right now. And, at the top of the list was LeBron James and Michael Phelps. And so, we went after them, and we got them on the move. And so you might be asking yourself, well, how do a couple, 20-year-olds in a dorm room, so to speak, how do you get to these types of people? And one hack to getting to someone famous or important is to find someone in that person's life who has a big influence over that person, but who everyone else doesn't already know, right? Okay, so let's take athletes. If you want to get to a pro athlete and no one really knows who you are, calling their agent or their partner or whatever doesn't really work because they get inundated, right? Those people get inundated in requests for their athlete. So, well, who in a pro athlete's life might people not know? Well, it turned out actually that the personal trainer was someone that no one really knew. And it also turned out that the personal trainer spent like 8 hours a day with their athlete. And in the case of Whoop, that was even better because we realized we wanted the personal trainer to kind of endorse the product as they were putting it on the athlete. So that really worked, and in that case, that became a strategy where we would go after personal trainers to get their athletes to wear it. Now, the harder thing than actually getting the product on them was resisting the urge to then say, oh, now that we've got LeBron wearing it, we have to give him 10% of the company. Because that was the bright idea that a lot of investors gave us, right? I go pitch the company, oh, we've got this early traction with investors. Oh, great, with athletes, oh, you should give LeBron James 10% of your company and he'll be a spokesperson for your company. Now, not to say that that's the wrong strategy for a lot of companies, but for Whoop, the reason that I had an allergic reaction to that idea is that if we gave LeBron, we gave Phelps, or fill in the blank individual, all this equity in the business, not only would we dilute the company a lot, but we would set a precedent of, well, they're wearing the product because they got a lot of equity in the business. And if your target market, at least in that case for us, was professional athletes, then lo and behold, every professional athlete is going to want 10% of the company, right, in order to wear it. Whereas if you said, look, even LeBron James paid for his Whoop. Well, okay, I guess I'll have to buy a Whoop if I want to wear one. So that was sort of like, that was a bit of the attitude that we had, and there was a little bit of stubbornness that went with that, and a little bit of confidence that went with it. But at the end of the day, we weren't going to win or lose by how much equity we gave LeBron. We were going to win or lose whether or not the product stayed on the product. And I think that's the right lesson to take from that period of time, which was, are you actually building a product people want? If you build a product that people want, you can screw up so many other things, okay? And you can still build a successful company. And I screwed up a lot of things. But we ultimately have built a product that people wanted and got value from. And that is really the most important thing.
And on this topic of great athletes, you've been in the news lately. You may want to get up for this.
Okay, here we go.
You had Alcaraz, Sabalenka, and Sinner
Yeah.
all at the Australian Open. They were told mid-tournament to take off their boots. You went on to tweet, data is not steroids. Do you like this kind of pushback? Does it get you fired up?
Well, I do think there's an element of when you are a challenger company or a challenger brand. Whenever you get a chance to stand up for yourself and you believe in what you're saying, that can always be good most of the time it's going to be good for the company. You may end up in a hornet's nest from time to time, but for the most part, that's going to be good for the company. And so, like in the case of the Australian Open realized that a lot of the top tennis players were wearing Whoop, and for some reason they didn't think that that was appropriate, and so in the middle of matches they were stopping Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner and Aryna Sabalenka and so on and so forth, and telling them to take their Whoop off. And of course that became a bit of a moment on television because you see people taking this thing off in the center court and what are they doing, what are they wearing. And so there's a question of whether you just let that happen or whether you stand up for yourselves. And we, of course, wanted to stand up for ourselves, and that in turn made the media story even a bigger story. But then it also reminded people that, like, okay, the world's best tennis players wear Whoop. And so that we felt was probably a good thing to remind people. And so, anyway, these are some of the nuances to deciding whether you put yourself out there or not.
And you proceeded to send them underwear so that they could hide their boobs, right?
Well, we have a line that's called Whoop Body, which allows you to wear a sensor in different locations of the body. And so we figured if there was a problem wearing it from the wrist, well, maybe they would choose to wear it somewhere else. And, that was ultimately up to them.
And in 2022, there's another quote up there, publicly declared victory over Amazon when they had their Halo ban. If you look in the bottom right corner of the screen, there is a picture of the Halo ban. We didn't want to give it too much space, but it's there. And you wrote, "Don't bother copying us, we will win." You're a competitive guy. What does competition look like for you?
Well, I think that, again, it's like this phenomenon I spoke earlier, we balance two different frames at the same time. The first frame is that you want to stay true to your identity as a company. And there's going to be certain things that you decide to do in your business that a bunch of people aren't doing, a bunch of other companies aren't doing. And those can end up defining who your company is. And then at the same time, you also want to be very mindful of what the competition is doing, and you want to make sure the competition isn't out ahead, and that the competition doesn't have features and functionality that maybe you need to have. And so, again, it's ignore the competition and it's beat the competition, and you're kind of jumping back and forth between these two different frames of mind. Now, in the case of Amazon, it was very much so a David versus Goliath moment, because in 2018 they actually met with Whoop to determine whether they wanted to invest in the company. And I spent a lot of time with them, there was a lot of information shared with them, and lo and behold, they didn't invest in the company, and then 2 years later they came out with a product called Amazon Halo, which was a direct knockoff of Whoop. And so I was, I think fairly pissed off about it. And so we used that as something of a rallying cry internally to say, look, we're going to prove to the company that's got unlimited resources and the biggest distribution in the world, we're going to prove to them that we're a better product. And as part of that, when we came out with our new 4.0 product, we wrote on every circuit board, "Don't bother copying us, we will win." And we wrote that with the inside joke being, well, all these companies that are copying us have to take our product apart. And we love the image of an Amazon engineer somewhere cracking open the Whoop van and seeing this message inside. But look, more than anything, it's to create some bravado and camaraderie. Because again, you're a much smaller company, and this company wants to kill you, and you shouldn't pretend they don't want to kill you. And you either will to that, or you stand up for yourselves. And we stood up for ourselves, and we're proud that that product's no longer in the market.
And there it is in the bottom right. You know, you have a very unique business model, being a subscription business model. There are companies like Quora and the typical Apple Watch where you just buy the product and there you go. You have to sort of sell to your customer every month or every year that they have to renew their subscription. You know, how does that work when when you're running this company on a day-to-day? How does that change the way you think of your day-to-day operations?
So when you build a company, I think it's important to be careful with how many things you actually try to innovate on. And for the most part, I would not recommend when you start a business to innovate that much around the business model, which is like, how do you sell the product, so to speak. There's a lot of businesses out there, and there's probably one that meets the right business model for you, and you can learn a lot from that. What we found with selling Whoop as hardware, which is what we did in 2017. So there's a one-time fee, you pay $500, you get the hardware, you get all the services. What we found is a couple of things. One is that people didn't really know what they were going to sign up for, and paying $500 for something that you haven't used before is quite a lot, and especially for a brand that's unknown. So we weren't selling all of that anymore. And the second thing we realized was that this whole concept of health monitoring and continuous health coaching was not like a one-time thing. It was a real evolution. And when we talked to our members, we would hear stories about, well, I bought it because I wanted to improve my sleep, but then I was, trying to train for a marathon, and I was using it for all the strength functionality, and then, my partner and I, we got pregnant, and now I'm pregnant, and now I gotta, go through that 9-month chapter of my life, and then afterwards. So, and that's just one woman on Whoop, but like, those are all very different chapters. And those are very different reasons to be using a health product that we're not using. And what we realized quickly is that our success was going to be very closely tied to how well we were able to follow our members on that journey, on that health journey. And that started to feel like a different business model. That didn't feel like a one-time fee. That felt like something that evolved with you. And so we did change our business model to something that didn't exist at the time, which was to bundle hardware and software and coaching, community, all under a subscription. And what that meant very quickly out of the gates is that we had much lower upfront costs. So no longer was someone paying $500, they're paying far less to get the hardware. Now even today we have a much more dramatic version of that, where you can actually sign up for free for Whoop. For free for 30 days, we send you a Whoop in the mail, and you decide at the end of those 30 days whether you want to be a member. So that's the ultimate extreme of how much we moved in the direction of believing in our service versus trying to get you to spend a lot of money up front. And we, I think, are more incentivized than other products in the market to continue innovating and to continue releasing new features and functionality as fast as we possibly can, because we're fighting to support you all on Whoop today as much as we're trying to find the next customer. And if you're a hardware business or a pure hardware business, you sell the hardware thing, and then you don't really change anything about it. And then hopefully 12 months later, you change some things about it, and you convince people to buy it again. But you, just as a consequence, the way your business is run, you're much more motivated to be finding new customers than caring about existing ones. And we also got the opportunity to learn from other businesses that we had seen in the market. So Fitbit, for example, was actually a very successful startup once upon a time. This was one of the original fitness trackers, or wearables, if you will. And what were they great at? They were great at selling hardware. And year over year, they were 3xing, 5xing even, how many units they sold. And at the peak, they were selling 25 million units a year, which is a lot, just to say. Well, where's Fitbit today? It's a declining brand. And in fact, they sold to Google for about 25% of the overall valuation that they had IPO'd for. So that was not a successful exit. And what's the reason for that? Well, the reason was that people would buy the product, but they wouldn't keep using it. And rather than fix that problem, they said, well, let's just create a lot more products that we can keep selling. And that worked for a very long time until it stopped working, and then all at once, the business stopped working. And so we've been in this mindset of we want to have members for life. We want to keep innovating. We want to stay very close to our members. We want to release innovation as fast as we can. So we'll update your existing hardware today if it can make you have a better experience. And that's very different than, say, a hardware business which wouldn't update your hardware. They try to get you to buy anything over here, right? So that's just a little bit about the business model. And subscriptions only really work, I think, if it's a product that's used often. In our case, of course, people wear Whoop daily, so that helps. You know, I'll get messages from entrepreneurs saying, I'm trying to convert my business to being a subscription. There's a lot of businesses that shouldn't be subscription, just to say it. But in our case, it helped.
And you've also gotten messages from people whose lives you saved, right?
Yeah.
How often does that happen?
I mean, I probably see a message to that effect on a weekly basis now, and I'm sure, you know, more broadly across the whole team, it's more frequent, and probably more broadly across, you know, 2.5 going on 3 million members. It's a lot more common. We don't hear about it, but look, it's an extraordinary feeling to get to build technology that gives people value, and it's a whole other feeling to build technology that saves someone's life. And that's just the truth. If you can align yourself with a mission that is true to your heart, it makes the hard work a lot easier. And so I'm proud to say I think we got a team at Whoop that's a bunch of missionaries that want to build great technology in the world and are willing to push themselves a lot harder to do so because we can feel the impact that it's having.
And over all these years, you've had your fair share of haters. You posted this a few days ago, I believe. People telling you you need a real CEO. Over the last 15 years or so, from year 1 to year 15, how has the job changed?
Well, just to say, you know, when you are first a CEO, there's so many things that you don't know and understand, and so I do think it's a job that is learned in part by doing. And I've not met enough CEOs to know that this is not just unique to a 22-year-old who has no experience like me or like I was, but also it's true of, you know, someone who worked for 25 years in a corporation and all of a sudden they become CEO and they realize, wow, okay, being a CEO is a different thing. And so there's just a lot of nuances and responsibility and different constituents that you need to manage. But the most important thing I think just to say is you can learn it. You can learn it. It's like anything else, you can learn it. And you have to put yourself in that hot seat and get comfortable being uncomfortable. And you want to try to adopt something of a growth mindset. This was a little bit of an unlock for me when I was 22, 23, 24 years old, trying to build a company. I remember I was 24. I had a team of 30 people or so. Maybe I raised $20 million. Whoop was, you know, not successful, but doing things that were interesting. And I was really strung out. Like I was really stressed. I was drinking too much coffee. I was drinking too much alcohol. I didn't have ways to cope with what I was feeling. And so I went through a process of kind of you know, personal development, if you will, and trying to figure out, okay, well, what is it going to take for me to be better at this and to be better in this role? And so I adopted what I thought was a mindset of, look, I'm just going to try to get a little better at this every day. And you do that for a few months, maybe you don't even notice it. You do that for a few years, you start to feel pretty different. And if you do that for 14 years, you can wake up and be running a company that you never could have imagined having built. And so that is, I think, the key is the mindset. You have to have a growth mindset. Do not sit in that seat and compare yourself to me. I've gotten to do it for 14 years. When I was in your seat, I could not do what I'm doing now. That's the key. You got to just try to get a little better every single day, and the amazing thing is that you can do it.
And we had a freshman at our event last Thursday with Bill Gurley, a GP at Benchmark. And she stood up and she said that every time she wants to start a venture of her own or found a company of her own, she gets burnt out by all the other things she has to deal with, you know, being in school, personal life, etc. if she was here, maybe she is here, what is your advice to her?
I think you have to be careful how many things you want in life at the same time. And if you want to build a company, it's helpful to not want anything else. And so, for me when I was 22 years old, that actually wasn't that hard. Like, I had a singular mission. And there's a lot of people that will tell you, okay, go get experience in X, Y thing for 5 years, and 10 years, and 12 years, and then start your thing. Well, I don't know. I mean, now I'm 36 years old, and I'm married, and I've got a kid, and I've got all sorts of new responsibilities, and I think to myself, well, there'd be a whole other challenges with starting a company right now that I didn't have when I was 22. So it's just to say, I don't know if there's ever a perfect time to start a company, but you all in this room should certainly not be discouraged from starting a company because you're young.
Well, thank you. That's it from me. We're going to pass it over to Q&A. Before we do that, we have Rory McIlroy, who won the Masters yesterday. None other than a green move to match his now 2 green jackets. So congratulations. Oh, there we go. We should have somebody coming around with the mic. Okay, go ahead.
We're going to give preference to people wearing the boots.
I'm Audi, like a car boom boom, and the question to you is that when you had come into the market, you already had 3 years since Fitbit, you had this job on TV and a few other competitors.
Yeah.
And how did you convince investors to cough up the first $500,000?
Well, I think literally if I look back on the first, $1 million that we raised, it was some combination of like a former boss that I worked for, friends, family members. It was some degree of anyone who would give me money. Now, I don't necessarily recommend that because once you take money from someone, you realize immediately the responsibility that you now have. And it's a great thing to make people money. It's also a very scary thing to lose people money. And so it does help if you can raise capital from professional investors who recognize the risks associated with starting a company. I think I raised capital from people not realizing how much risk I was taking on in managing their capital. And so that probably in turn made it feel very stressful when things went wrong. But it's all to say that you need to meet a lot of people, like reps. I met so many people in that early phase of building the company, and 95% of them said no in one way or another. But if I met enough people, you sort of start stacking some wins. And there's a bunch of techniques to fundraising. We can talk more about that if folks are really interested in fundraising. But it's a process like anything else.
And this round you raised money from Abbott Labs, Mayo Clinic, so you did that very consciously.
Yeah, I think, look, as you get better at raising capital, you start to realize, okay, you create a lead investor, the lead investor sets the terms, then there's a certain allocation that's left. Of the allocation that's left, you want to create demand for that allocation, and you want to be strategic about who you bring in. And so in the case of Whoop, we're going through this kind of long evolution from being a company working primarily in sports and athletics to now being a company that's working in sports, athletics, health, and medicine. And bringing on Ahmed, who's a leading medical device maker, and Mayo Clinic, who's a world famous research institution. Like that helps pull us into this new strategic direction.
Hello, I'm Tanya. So I have a question. You came from an economics and government background, very unconventional. And then you went on to build a business which again was unconventional. You didn't go with the screens. you went screenless, and then your marketing strategy was also unconventional. You went for the athletes, not for the masses. So as a 22-year-old, how did you find that conviction?
I think I found somewhere between the ages of 22 and 25 the ability to listen to like an inner voice. And some people would call this their gut, some people would call it intuition. And then what happens when you start listening to that voice, we all have that voice in our head that is saying this is a good idea or a bad idea. When you start listening to it, you can create something of a track record around it. And you can say, okay, well, my intuition on people is maybe a 5 out of 10, and my intuition on product is a 9 out of 10, and my intuition on fundraising is a 1 out of 10, and whatever. I'm making this up. But the odds are that you will all have an inner voice that knows something about where your life should go. And I think that the faster that a young person starts getting in touch with that voice, the better. And when you find an alignment with that voice, that gives you another level of conviction. And if you lose track of that voice, which is easy to do, by the way, because there's a lot of people in your life who will tell you things that are different than that voice, you can get a little off balance. And if enough people in your life tell you something that's opposite to that inner voice, what do you want to listen to? Is there a comfort in doing the thing that everyone tells you to do, or is there a comfort in doing the thing that you feel drawn to do? And there's a certain confidence that you can build from doing the thing that you feel drawn to. Now, there's also a lot of things that pull you away from that voice. Your cell phone is one of them, right? Like, if you can't listen to yourself, if you're distracted, you can't actually find that inner voice. I found that inner voice in part because I was so stressed out that I had to learn how to meditate. And then I realized in meditating I could kind of talk to myself, and that was this amazing thing for me. And different people will find different forms of that. Exercise is another form. People go for long runs or do yoga or whatever. But you need to find a chance to check in with yourself. And in particular, I think this is important for young people, because you are going to get the worst advice in your entire life when you're 22 years old. And it's going to come from all the best intentioned people. And you can take all those bits of feedback in, but at the end of the day, you got to ask yourself, like, what is right for me? And you're going to be wrong, and I've been wrong plenty. But there is something about finding that inner voice and trusting it. And I think there's a natural confidence that builds from that when you do it enough times.
Thank you, and congratulations on an amazing G-round.
Thank you.
And Peter Thiel sat in that seat 15 years ago and looked at a room of MBAs and said they had no conviction. Some vacuum there. Sorry.
Hi, Will. Thank you so much for your time today. So my name is Yuna, and I'm a current economics student here at BU. I'm also a student founder, and I'm very much interested in health tech space. So I'm also a movement member, as you see on the move here.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. And so I've been using this for a couple of months now, and I really enjoy the product. And I wanted to ask you a question, as someone who's very interested in this product space, as someone who's interested in the health space. So I've been going through a lot of Reddit posts about Whoop on my own time. I'm interested in the products, and I noticed that a lot of consumers are going to create their own dashboards and analytics to help support their Whoop data, because the data is there, they just don't know what to do with it. But one thing that you guys absolutely nailed was how you guys created the Aqua recovery connection, and that helped a lot of users. And obviously, it's helping a lot of users right now in their lives, helping them in several ways. But I want to know if you guys are trying to create ways to help users see how the data can be translated to actions or guidances about their daily lives to improve health. Thank you.
Thank you. And look, I mean that's a critical, pretty foundational question what we're trying to do. And then in general, you want to try to make the most insights as you can from this data. We're doing a lot with large language model partnerships to enable that. We're certainly looking at different configurations of the data and different dashboards that we can do for it. We're we're thinking carefully about how much we want members to take control of that themselves versus to do it in a, call it a WOOP sandbox. But that is the fundamental question, which is how do you continue to innovate on providing actionable insights and coaching for our members. And that's something that we look at all the time. There's a bunch of dashboards around behavior change, around health outcomes, and so it's a huge area of investment for us. Here's a member right here.
Hey, Will, Brendan, recent MBA grad. Thanks for all your insights. Just a question for you as CEO. If you could offer any insights to maintaining cultural coherence as you plan to hire, you mentioned 600 people. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think you have to start by saying what's the criteria for which we're hiring someone to be at this company. We've created these rubrics, for example, where what you all on a little inside track here, you apply for the job. But we grade you on intensity, humility, grit, AI readiness, your team first mentality, and these are some of the things that we find are successful traits of people who want to work at WOOP. A lot of times we'll have 3, 4, 5 people in a room, and we'll be trying to do something that's never been done before. And so you kind of have 2 different types of people, just broadly speaking. If you tell them they're going to do something that's never been done before, either their ears perk up, or they say, well, that doesn't make any sense, so I will do something that's never done. And you want to find the people whose ears perk up. You want to find people who are ambitious and willing to do things that are very hard. And so anyway, that's all to say that the person who might be looking for is different than Google or the next, fill in the blank next company. And so I think that's part of it. Another piece of it is you've got certain values, and your team grows and evolves with those values, and you promote people based on those values, and fire people based on those values, and so on and so forth. You also, I think, have to pay a lot of attention to sort of recurring meetings and processes that hold the fabric together. During COVID, before COVID, we used to have a team lunch where the whole company would eat lunch together on Fridays. And maybe we were 50 to 100 people at that stage. And then during COVID, the company grew even more, and we weren't obviously having a Friday team lunch, and so we turned it into a Zoom thing. So then, you had this weekly team meeting on Zoom. And then, well, now we're all back in the office again, but there's also some people that are traveling, or they live in a different state. And so now we've got this hybrid lunch that we put on, and it's kind of a show. We've got announcements, we've got people coming up to present things, and this is one very specific example. But it's the kind of thing that you build at over time, and you want to keep innovating on, and you want to use as a mechanism to bring people in and bring people together. So culture is really how people make decisions when you're not there, right? And you want to have rubrics in people's minds. Are we making a decision that we want to go really fast where things might break, or are we making a decision that we're going to move more cautiously, but we're going to move more slowly, but maybe nothing will break. And maybe a bank is over here and WOOP is over here, but those are just on one dimension. Those are completely different cultures. So those are some of the things that come to mind, but it's about as important as anything when your business is growing.
I think you have time for one more.
A year ago, you did a podcast and you said you didn't join the 1% club yet. A year later, have you joined it?
I have joined the 1% club, and I managed to get there without alcohol, which tells you how bad I was feeling. So the 1% club is, I forget exactly how many people now have had a 1% recovery, but it's essentially the lowest possible recovery you can get on WOOP. And I managed to go 13 years without being 1%, and now I've since gotten one.
Have you ever got 100?
I've never gotten 100% recovery, but that's in part because that's impossible.
But on a more real note, how do you see like a green recovery day versus a yellow recovery day affecting your day in the office and the business? How do you make sure that a yellow day doesn't persist into a yellow week, and kind of just it doesn't affect how you're in the office and about yourself?
Well, I think if you're in any leadership position, but it's probably a general good theme for anyone, is like you don't want to have good days and bad days. You don't want people to be like, oh, you should go ask Will this today, it's a good day. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to be like, you don't want to be adding to the problem of a business that already has ups and downs. You don't want to be part of that up and down. You want to try to have some kind of even keel. And I bring that up in the context of the recovery score because if I'm run down on whoop, maybe I'll make more of a conscious effort to bring some energy and life to the day, or maybe I'll also say to myself, maybe today's not the day I'm going to make 3 of the most important decisions for the quarter. You know, and you can kind of give yourself some permission to say, maybe that's a tomorrow decision, right? But then there's a whole separate phenomenon, which, because I get asked a lot about, oh, is there data anxiety and this, that, and the other, or if it tells me I'm red, am I now going to behave like I'm red? Well, you also learn to develop some resilience too. You know, just because I'm run down doesn't mean I'm going to tell myself that I can't do what I need to do today. Now I give myself a little more permission along the way, but I'm not going to just phone it in if my body's run down. Now, over the course of a week or a month, if I see that same trend, well then maybe I have to check myself. And part of the reason that WOOP was founded is around this idea of overtraining. But I think it also pertains to some notion of burnout and fatigue, which is that if you're hard charging, you can push your body a little further than it should go. And maybe that's okay for a few days or a couple of weeks, but that's not a place you want to be for a couple of months. And so that's where using the data I think is important too, which is you can look at the trend of this information and give yourself, have a mirror for yourself and say, okay, now I need to change course.
And I think we can do one more. You can choose.
Is that a WOOP right there in the green?
Well, I was wondering, I was wondering, in terms of the future of WOOP, do you see yourself sticking with just the wearables or expanding beyond it?
I think broadly speaking, we want to measure as much relevant information as possible about the human body. And some of that information will come from a 24/7 sensor. And some of that information may live elsewhere, like in your doctor's office or a blood test that you recently got. And so it's then being able to bring that information into the WOOP app and having this central home of your health. And then of course there will be additional sensing capabilities that WOOP will bring to market that may go broader than what we think of it today. And I think, just again, the fundamental questions that I ask myself, or we ask ourselves is this going to, better measure the human body? And just to say it, like that's been the question for 14 years now. So it's nice when you can keep coming back to that central question and staying true to that mission. And that's how we look at innovation going forward.
Well, thank you so much. On behalf of everybody here in the Customs School of Business, we wish you the best of luck and congratulations on unbelievable success. Thank you. Please join us in the atrium for beverages. Thank you.